We'll begin the Administrative Claims Committee.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee and board. Good to see you this morning. Appreciate you being here and want to thank you for all your time yesterday. I know it was a longer agenda than usual in some ways, and same thing for today, largely associated with implementing Tier 5, but I appreciate that and appreciate your time this morning. The one item in the Claims Committee today is one modification of a joinder agreement for the city of Guntown, which should be behind G, tab G. And as you can see there, they are proposing, they already have Social Security and retirement coverage for their employees, but in the previous joinder agreement, the Board of Aldermen were excluded, and now they are requesting to amend the original joinder to add the alderman, which we estimate be around 5 employees. We've looked at this in the typical fashion that we do from a legal standpoint and financial standpoint, and would recommend an amendment to the joinder to include the Board of Aldermen for the City of Guntown to be approved for retirement coverage effective September 1, 2025. Unless there are any questions, we would ask for the board's approval, or the committee's approval.
That's in Lee County. I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
Do we need another second? No. Do we need a third?
And that is prospective. Are they eligible for any retroactive?
Mason, you want to talk to that?
They did not.
That's not in here, but
They did not ask for
Yeah.
retroactive.
Okay.
this is perspective, yeah.
I apologize. They did ask for retroactive coverage. They did.
But that's not included in this motion, right?
No, sir.
That's something separate that's outlined in law and regulation, right?
Yes, sir, that's in the
That's in the
joint.
regs.
Yeah.
Okay. There is motion second. Votes.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No opposed. Motion carries.
Thank you, and that's all we have.
All right, good morning. We'll continue with the administrative committee meeting. We'll call it to order. Mr. Higgins, I believe we briefly discussed that you wanted to take these one at a time, and then we'll have one motion and one vote on all of them. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that'd be fine if that's agreeable with you and the committee.
All right, we'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you for that. And we'll start with the, as the agenda says, the Tier 5 regulation related amendments. And I believe this is going to be, I didn't look it up ahead of time. Let me find the tab here. Is it E?
D, I think.
D and E. All right, looks like D is going to be the next one for Regulation 65. So we'll go to E, and we'll just take them slowly one at a time there. As Dr. McCoy mentioned, I think yesterday toward the end of our meetings, these changes in regulation here under Tier 5 are largely related to just implementation of Tier 5 that's already outlined in the law or covered in many ways yesterday. With a few exceptions, that's all it is. And by exceptions, there are a couple of things where we added some language based on the advice of tax counsel as far as some of the federal requirements, and then maybe some minor cleanup wording and things like that. But by and large, it was due to the implementation of Tier 5 as outlined in the passage of the law, and then some of the things we talked about yesterday in the plan document. And I'm going to go through these today, but as often is the case, it's certainly been a team effort with a great deal of input and work done by the members of the executive team, Ms. Lee, as well as everybody, but especially those in the line of business, including Mr. Franham and Ms. Green. We had input and review from the Attorney General's office, and not so much maybe in this case from Ice Miller, but they're usually involved as well. So definitely want to thank them for their work and just share. I'm going to go through these, but if we have questions about the proposed changes or anything in the regs, we certainly together can get you an answer. If agreeable, I'll just go through slowly one at a time. I won't necessarily read every word since these are just amendments to the existing regulation, and unlike yesterday, you can see that the change is in red. But the first one, which is on page 1 of 43 in your notebook, as far as the way the packet's put together, is associated with Chapter 14 or Reg 14, dealing with the submission of monthly reports. And you can see this is just updating about the employee contribution and other changes associated in Tier 5 on page 2 of 43. It talks about, as we talked about yesterday, with the employee and employer contributions in the DC portion. And of course, effective March 1, 2026. One thing I should have mentioned in the beginning is much like the plan document, if you all approve today, this will be the initial adoption of the regulations. We'll come back in October for the final adoption.
Is this in our minutes? Is this in our material?
Yes, sir. It's in the notebook behind tab, what was it, tab E? And it's the
Thank you.
no, okay. So unless there are any questions, I'll move on to the next one. All right, the next one is Chapter 28, or Reg 28, about benefits withdrawing from service prior to age 62. As you can see, that's been changed to 62, and then down below in the new Section 104 is a lot of the information with the new Tier 5. And if you turn the page, you'll see a few additional changes. And unless we have any questions, we'll just keep moving forward. The next one is, in the notebook is, let's see, Regulation 35, Chapter 35, with filing the application for retirement benefits, and you have to flip a few pages for this one.
No,
Yes, sir.
32.
There's 32?
Let's see. All right, I'm showing Chapter 35, but my notebook may be in a different order. Page. Oh, yeah, sorry, thank you, I see now, I missed one, sorry about that, thank you, yes. I skipped over too fast. So it's Chapter 32 or Reg 32, where there's one change there in the middle paragraph. And then moving on to where it was, the next one, Regulation 35, you have to flip a few pages for that one. What's reflected at the bottom of page 9 of 43, in the paragraph about normal retirement age, there's an adjustment or a proposed revision. And then that's, other than effective date, that's all. The next one,
Before you leave there, is it 35 years, or does it age 60 enter in that in any way?
well, with the new Tier 5, it's basically 35 years of service with no age requirement, or age 62 and 30 years. This is for an unreduced retirement. So it's 35 years with no age requirement, or age 30 years and age 62, or age 65 and 8.
So if I'm 60 years old, I can retire at 32 years, not 35?
Yes, but you'd have an actuarial reduction.
Which is
Correct.
consistent with
Was it?
Tier 4.
That's right, consistent,
Taking an
yeah,
actual
sure.
reduction.
Now, when this goes into effect, in 8 years, we're gonna have a retiree.
And explain that. Gonna have a what?
A retiree.
Somebody's
Somebody's
Sure.
gonna have their 8 years vested and they're gonna be of age to be able to retire, I think is what Dr. McCoy's saying.
Yeah.
And
That's
that
right.
is gonna happen, probably.
Yeah. Sure. Somebody who started later in their career reaches the 8 years, which meets the requirement for vesting, then they'd have the age and
If
they'd
they're
be able to retire.
65 and 8 years,
They'd be able to retire.
then they would be able to retire with that 8-year, with 8 years worth of pension benefit.
Would make 2034 your first retiree.
Yes, sir, yeah, possibly.
So a guy comes out of the military and then goes to work with the state, works 8 years, and he's 62, 63 years old, so he
Can't retire,
he
but when
can
he's
retire.
65, he can,
Okay.
with 10 years in
Well,
that case, for instance. So-
Technically, you may have named the first retiree, because if they have 4 years of active duty military service, they would get credit for
They
those
could.
4 years. So technically, you could have a 4-year employee.
No, the
But
4
they
years,
add it?
the 4 years doesn't vest him, he has to
Okay,
vest.
so he has to do 8, okay.
And then the 4 years is added.
So it doesn't qualify, okay.
Well, now, that's important. Is that clear?
Yes, sir. And I
4
think,
years or 8 years?
That's current.
yes, sir, that's correct, and that is correct. I was gonna say that's the
Your
same.
military service can't vest you.
I don't know that, is there anything that will allow you to get vesting except actual service credit?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. I mean, you
have to-
can't
you
use
have to-
leave, you can't use leave
Yeah.
for vesting, I mean, none of that, okay.
That's correct.
Service credit yet, but not the
Only
base.
It's plus on top of vesting.
That's correct.
But it can't get you to vesting.
That's
That's
correct.
right, that's right.
Correct.
And as y'all were saying, that's existing process in law. Yes, ma'am, sure.
If they have reached age 62, but not completed 30 full years, they can't have a retirement at 62. It's just reduced
That's right.
in the new tier. So you kept saying 65.
Sorry, yep,
You can do it at
Thank you.
62. There's just an actuarial reduction.
okay, so at 62, you could retire, so will somebody clarify where the trigger is on that one? Is it at 62 and vested? Okay.
One thing to keep in mind too is under the existing law with Tier 4, there's also an actuarial reduction if you retire before 65. You know, so.
The reason why you don't see that in here, Mr. Breland, is because this is normal retirement age,
Okay.
which means an unreduced benefit.
Full benefit,
Yes,
really?
unreduced.
Okay, I got you. Thank you.
All right, let's see. And thank you for catching me on the one I inadvertently turned past. If I do that again, please let me know. I think the next one is Chapter 48 or Regulation 48 about PLSO. And makes the changes because one is not eligible for PLSOs with the new Tier 5. Next one is Chapter 51, Regulation 51 about unused leave, and it makes the changes for Tier 5. As you know, there's no longer credit for unused leave toward service retirement or retirement service. On page 22 of 43, I believe in the same regulation, there's a change there around the statutory leave, clarifying that. And on page 23 of 43, talks about elected officials. Page 24 of 43, if you continue to flip, it talks about and clarifies and confirms the leave payment, the 240-hour payment for leave. And I think it's effective dates most of the way out for that one. I'll keep moving on unless anyone pauses for questions. The next one is Regulation 54. This one is something that was added, and Ms. Lee can speak to in more detail if needed, but this is one that was suggested while we were at it from our outside tax counsel due to the federal law and requirements associated with the public safety officers you can see in red. Moving over to page 30 of 43, it's talking again about the eligibility of, or the attainment of normal retirement age. And if you'd like to slow down on any of these, or if you have any questions, let me know. The reason I'm not reading
I
every.
do, at least an opportunity to read what's in red.
Sure,
Some
be
of
happy
us
to do
are
that.
slow learners.
Hey, no problem at all. No problem at all. So I'm gonna leave my notebook at, page 30 of 43. And, I'm gonna ask Devetta to come on up if you would, in case you have questions. We'll go through each one. And we certainly will.
So, Ray, on that one that you just went over about the retired public safety officers and their, tell me if this is correct. Is this like, almost like if you're an employer, when you're employed, you can take out premiums and those are sheltered from tax, basically, in some form. Then this allows public safety officers to do that same thing, even though they're paying the premium. This is something they get to basically net off of their taxes.
And they
if
always
qualify.
could do that.
Okay.
The difference is we had to pay their insurance for them. So when Benefit Payments is handling payroll here, we have statutory authority to assignment, if you will, they can authorize us to pay their
Just
insurance.
like an employer type of
Right.
situation. Y'all control
And
the
that's for
money and send it.
everyone.
Okay.
But for public safety, they could only get this extra credit if we paid it. And Audra from Ice Miller suggests, we really opened this up because normal retirement age had to be addressed for Tier 5.
Okay.
But she said, since we're opening it, go ahead and clean it up to just, it used to say it's only available to the extent that the plan agrees to deduct and remit their premiums. And now that's not only, they can do it themselves and claim it themselves. So that's the only difference. This is a cleanup based on secure or either secure or secure 2.0. I can't remember. But you remember we dealt with some of this in the defined contribution plans back years ago to be a little bit more clear. And she said, since we were opening this up, we may as well.
And what's the scope of that? What's the determination of a public safety officer?
It's well defined here. Public safety officers in page 2, 29 of 43. It defines police officer, firefighter, chaplains of police or fire, sheriffs, deputy sheriffs, constables. It goes on and on. So and a lot of this is not even, we didn't make these determinations. These are broader federal.
Okay. But that's still pretty, the scope's still pretty narrow to not be security, maybe, or something like that, right? Well, it is security. It depends on
State hospital.
security officers, so they would be too. Okay. Thank
This
you.
was all vetted long ago. The only change here is that we don't have to pay their premium for them to get this credit. They can pay their own premium and file this with their own tax professionals and get the same, credit. And the tax
Who would
professionals
want, who would
already.
want to do that? But okay.
And
all
we
right.
do pay, I mean, Mason's folks in payments, they pay a lot of this, it's deducted and handled already even for non-public safety retirees.
yeah.
So,
That's
yeah.
who would want to do it the other way, but okay.
But the main tier 5 element is under section 103, where we had to adjust that normal retirement age.
Thank you.
The next one is Regulation 57, or Chapter 57, as it's reflected here, page 33 of 43, and I'll pause for a little bit and give you time to read it. And we're certainly at whichever pace you prefer. We have plenty of time, and we'll be happy to go through it line by line or discuss the reg. Just wasn't sure exactly how the board preferred, since a lot of it's due to the changes in law you're familiar with.
I will say, this comes from, I think, Dr. McCoy's last meeting about how are the people going to know to put them in tier 4 or tier 5. This gives us explicit board authorization to provide information necessary for proper enrollment in retirement plans administered by PERS. So that's fine.
And you can see a few changes on each page, including in the back what she was talking about. And I think item 6 is actually related to a new GASB standard and some requests we had from local schools.
Employers are asking for more information on their actives
For their
financials.
financial statements?
Mhm.
Okay.
The statute says that all PERS member information is confidential, except under board regulation, and you have to get a subpoena to get the press can't get it, unless, no one can get it except under board regulation. This is the regulation that authorizes us to share information with our employers.
Can I ask you one question there? Because it's a very important thing. If somebody is a relatively new Tier 4 employee and they choose to leave public employment and they want to withdraw their money, I want them to know, be assured to know that if they make a full withdrawal, they will no longer re-enter in that tier. So flashing red lights, multiple, you've got to be aware of that, because I don't want anybody coming back and saying, gosh, if I had only known, I wouldn't have taken the withdrawal. So I don't know what the board wants to do or what staff thinks is the best way to handle that, but I do not want anybody unknowingly removing themselves from a tier that they want to rejoin.
Certainly, we can do that. And of course, we do that now, but we can increase that correspondence or effort and definitely include that as part of our training and communication with employers. Very important.
And it's already in progress for like the refund forms being updated to have bold language, like, more clear and concise.
You can put my phone number on there and I'll tell them how serious it is if you want me to. I just don't want anybody to unknowingly put themselves in a different position.
And I don't know about other employers, we fight with them almost right now. Don't take it out. We do everything in the world to talk them into leaving it at least for some period of time till you know what you are, but some it doesn't matter.
Yeah, and some of them, especially mental health, I've seen over the years, whenever the less you pay in your salary by your positions, the more likely probably that they get to where this is some money they can't borrow against it, I don't think, but so they can take it out and they think they'll be able to pay these bills and then I'll just start working again. So they quit and then they come back. So it's a great point because, yeah, you're going to have folks that they do not know what we know about it and know that they are throwing away a much bigger benefit under Tier 4 versus Tier 5 and starting over. That's another whole different issue, but it's a good point. So especially on some of those folks, there are plenty that run the range of socioeconomic, and salary pieces, but usually you find people that get in a tight and then they need to take that money, and this is the pot of money they think's there, of course. It's sad.
It is, and at some point it's their choice. A lot of times it's a change of life circumstance that's caused the change in employment. I just don't want them, I want every roadblock in front of them for them to know I'm gonna make this knowingly, intelligently, and understand the consequences.
Absolutely. All right, if okay to move on, the next one is Chapter 61. Time to read over the changes.
Just one question, is this talking about SLRP now?
Yes,
Is that where
Slurp,
we are?
we closed Slurp, and we also noted that,
Well,
Muni was closed. I think.
Section 102, number 7. I'm not an English teacher, but SLRP is closed or was closed. We're not past tense yet.
But we're gonna be, because it doesn't go in effect till after March 1. So that's why we went with was, because it's done in the past.
I know, but
We
we're
can do
voting on
is.
it now.
We can do it. Tell me what you
Well,
want.
I just want to make sure that the technicality of
Mhm.
is and was doesn't, I know we all understand the interpretation of it, but
Mhm.
just look at that for that particular word.
No,
You know,
they-
it was closed
Yep.
per legislation. It is closed, on that date. So, I mean.
I missed which
Sure,
way it
either-
went,
either's
though.
fine,
Did you
whichever.
say you were or were not an English teacher? I'm just
I am
curious.
not.
Just making sure I just couldn't remember.
He's in Dr. Ballou's seat, though,
Oh, okay. Well, that could be channeling a lot of energy for that.
It's just,
So,
it-
Dr. Moore,
I think, go ahead.
for clarity, let's just change it. If you feel strongly about it, because I want to file it the way it's gonna be. So let's, for
I didn't
clarity's
feel
sake,
strongly, I just want it to be correct.
well, let's say is. Would you like to modify it?
That's fine
plus
with
there's-
me.
we
I
got
just
final
wanted to bring
adoption
it to your
too, so.
attention. I don't, is or was, doesn't.
Is.
And go ahead and say what I think you were saying earlier about, and I don't mind whichever's preferred or best, for sure. Were you writing it that way because once it's in effect, it will be past tense? Is that?
Yeah, but I do understand what he's saying, and it's an easy fix. Let's do it now.
All right, let's do this.
Mhm.
You know, it was closed if you put a clarifying prepositional phrase by legislation, or is closed, as of March, because March hadn't gotten here yet, so.
Well, how much is there a chance you're gonna have some amendment to these regulations once we get into Tier 5 that it's gonna be easy enough? You know, if it was gonna be,
Well,
this
let-
is done, then
Let me just
somebody
say,
may have to do this just for that word.
there's a finite number of people that are impacted by this, so I really don't care, I just wanted it correct.
No,
And
sure,
as you
no,
can see,
that's
this reg
a
is
good
not open often. I'm guessing it was probably
I'm-
developed in conjunction with our regular determination letter filing to the IRS long ago. So it's been open twice, I think, ever. So we'd rather not if we don't have to. So is, and I'll file it as is.
But whatever, I'm not gonna look at it again, because I'm not, that section doesn't pertain to me, so I just, anyway.
Well, I defer to Dr. McCoy
Me
for
too.
is or was. The key word in that sentence is closed. So I don't want anybody to be confused. Slurp, closed, because that's still a point of, although it affects a finite number of people in the program, it affects an infinite number of people with the negative sentiment, I guess is the way I would say it, and I agree with them. I don't think it should have been created. It's a point of divisiveness between elected officials and their constituencies, and that's why it was closed, is closed, and will be closed. But thank you. I think is probably better.
Maybe we could include all three centers, Clark.
Is, was, and shall forevermore.
Heretofore.
Yes.
And we wanted to document SLRP because we don't really have a lot of regulatory language around SLRP. And so we wanted it to be documented. And so then we said, well, they didn't even document the muni. So let's document that one as well while we have it open.
Yep, that's on the page there to the right. If there are no other questions, and okay, we'll move on to Chapter 64 now, which I think is the last one in this list. Few minor changes reflecting the updates.
Where is it? 39. Keep up with it.
And then on section 101, 39 of 43, it talks about purchasing allowable service credit, which is not allowed in Tier 5. And then on page 41 of 43, just clarifies that retroactive coverage is addressed in Regulation 32.
All right, board members, you've heard the explanations of the regulation changes. Any further questions?
I'd make a motion for initial adoption.
I have a motion for initial adoption. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Hey,
All opposed? Motion passes. Mr. Higgins, we're down to Regulation 65.
All right, thank you. Thank you all for that. And this is behind tab D, I believe, for Regulation 65. And as mentioned in the summary, again, behind tab D, page 1 of 5 in this particular area, Reg 65 deals with earned compensation, and this one is to clarify earned compensation for coroners and deputy coroners. And if you continue to flip, you'll see most of the changes are in section 107, the new section 107, page 4 or 5, and I'll pause briefly and allow you to have time to read that this morning.
if I might go ahead and just ask a question about that.
Sure.
Basically, the coroner has a salary.
Oh, say that about that.
Did I do that?
No,
not
I did
hear
it.
I
you
think
do
it was,
that.
yeah,
Paper.
it was us. Yeah.
You
Okay.
didn't do that.
Basically, the coroner has a salary now. Is that correct?
A base
What-
salary.
So the fees are attached with their investigation of the deceased, so to speak. So with that, with what we're doing here is if the deputy coroner performs all of the paperwork and goes everywhere and receives the fee, that has to be reported. Is that what this is clearing up?
It's definitely clearing up that subject. You can jump in at any time, but you have the coroner. You mentioned coroner, which is elected.
Yeah.
This is, and of course, this addresses the coroner, but it's mainly directing and trying to provide some clarity about the deputy coroner, because you are correct. It varies by county. And somewhat recent changes in state law, there's a regular salary, but then also they get paid per case.
Okay.
And so this is clarifying and providing some direction and guidance on how to address that.
It's an issue that keeps coming up, and we've been handling it on the retirement side, facts and circumstances, case by case. But we wanted some clarity, and we're trying to make a fee-paid, non-elected official fit into what is generally more of a 40-hour-a-week career pension system. And so these people are not paid by the hour, they're paid by the case. And the case may cost 3-4 hours, or it might be a 1 hour. I mean, this not, so the statute says that you have to work half the full-time equivalent for the position in order to be reported to PERS. But what does that mean in a fee-paid scenario? And we've talked with our local fee-paid official on the board. I've talked with lawyers everywhere about how can we make this work. It's a little bit of a challenge, and most counties are not reporting their deputy coroners, but some are. And some are reporting them sporadically, intermittently. They worked this month, they didn't work that quarter, they didn't work. It's kind of all over the place. And so we wanted some clarity here about what earned compensation is for a coroner or deputy coroner. And then that would give us an opportunity to train and work with our counties to understand you can report a deputy coroner if you work them. That means you have to actually, just because they get $300 a month, that didn't mean they did any working for that money. They have to work, like we all have to work to receive coverage. Earned compensation is how it's defined. So anyway, this is just clarity for us. They now get $300 to $900. The county can decide how much a deputy coroner receives. And so some of the counties that are receiving larger amounts, we don't, are they actually working? Is it a retainer? We just wanted some clarity on how this would work. So it says now you can get the salary, but we actually need to see case fees as well to show that you worked. And then there's some counties, small counties, the deputy may not, he's just in case, right? He shouldn't be reported because you're not going to work them regularly in a way that they are consistently reported for service credit. So this is going to give us some clarity. It's going to give some clarity to some of our coroners and deputy. We have a coroner, I've spoken to 2 elected coroners, the Coroner Association lobbyist, lawyer. I've spoken with the leadership of the Coroner Association and some deputy coroners, and they're all hungry for this because I have one coroner who's doing like 60 cases a month. That's a lot. He's making a lot of money. And we have some coroners who they just call them every month or so, whenever they, every quarter or so. They don't get many bodies at all. So we're just trying to be clear on sometimes you can qualify to report a deputy coroner.
So what is, just for the board knowledge, what is the fee per case?
$185.
$185.
Okay,
$185 a body.
Okay.
And Representative Oliver has been involved in this discussion as well.
The county
He
pays.
has. He knows we're trying to fix some things that we can't fix without some clarity in our regulations.
But one thing too, historically about our regulations is I don't think they're necessarily designed for the deputy coroner type role, which is a little bit of a unique situation because the coroner is an elected official, and you may remember that an elected official is, in the context of PERS coverage, is deemed to be full-time for the purposes of service credit by being an elected official, whereas the deputy coroner is not, and that's why it's a little bit more unique.
It's in the law that an elected official is full-time for PERS coverage. Like, you can be an alderman, doesn't matter, you're full-time. But a coroner is not an hourly working schedule. It's kind of a, yeah.
And it may vary. You may have, 5, 10, 15 deaths this month, and you might have 2 next month. So it's all over the board with what we have 3 deputies in Lee County. And they all have, if we don't report them, but if we did, they would have significant income to be eligible.
That's
So
right.
do they still get the fee if you don't report them?
Yes.
Yes. So if you may be a small county who has 1 deputy coroner just in standby in case your coroner is not available, but they don't work often, it should just be a non-covered role. The county should decide that upon hiring, this is non-covered, here's a non-covered form. It's intermittent, sporadic, we're not gonna report you to PERS.
So the non-reported money does not go to PERS?
No.
Okay, as far as,
They've never been in the system. They've not had any connection. They're all 3 retired. They're all 3 retired. They would have vesting. The odds of vesting would be.
it just appears in a newspaper under
Yes.
your.
That's right.
Whatever we all call that, they publish it.
But we have some that are not that. We have some who, like I mentioned in one county, I did the math, and this gentleman's making a lot of money doing a lot of work every month. And he's making more than most PERS members doing this work and is working very hard and should be covered. So we're trying to be clear on how we can have a pathway to coverage.
And in a large county, it can be lucrative. If you don't mind seeing the deceased, it can be, and certain accidents that are there, it can be.
Well,
I don't want the job, but
I think she referenced the deputy doing 60 cases and 60 times 185. That's pretty significant.
Plus the salary.
Plus the salary.
A monthly
So
salary.
if I were the deputy, I'd want that to be reported. So I
Some
can-
months 75, 80 bodies.
And of course, this would give some clarity going forward on how to report it.
right. And I will make the motion to adopt the ordinance.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Mr. Higgins, item 3, PERS funding policy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This, on the funding policy, I believe is behind tab F. And this one, the entire current funding policy is in here, but this is, just wanted to briefly bring something to the board's attention, call your attention to it, and have a brief discussion about it. And then based on your feedback and preferences, we could make the changes. Very minor suggested word changing, or wording change. Keep flipping a couple pages into the funding policy. Under actuarial assumptions down toward the bottom. Now, this is the page that begins with asset valuation method at the top. And actuarial assumptions at the bottom.
I'm sorry, which page are you on?
This unfortunately does not have a page number, but it's the, let me count them up.
It's number 5, it looks like.
5, that's right,
of 8
5.
On the
That's right.
Adobe, on the board portal. So
5 of the 5 of the funding policy, and it's
I would
the,
recommend page numbers.
yes, I totally agree.
Sorry, I'm just trying to do my part here.
The,
What's the top page? What does it say? Actuary.
Asset valuation method looks like it's at the top of the page.
that's at the top, yep.
I mean, there's not really a title, that's just the first bold
One more.
piece.
And then the part I wanted to mention is in the bottom paragraph of actuarial assumptions. And then the very brief part I wanted to highlight and bring to your attention is just simply has to do with timing. As you can see in there, it talks about this policy being based on the experience study for the period ending June 30, 2022. And we just completed the new one, which is 2024. And so I wanted to bring that to your attention. And as a suggestion, if the committee and board agrees, we could just slightly change that language to make it more evergreen, if you will, which instead of having the exact dates, just say something to the effect of the most recent experience study as approved by the board. Or if you prefer to be more specific, we would just simply update the dates. I think if you ask for my suggestion, I would recommend the evergreen approach. But that's all this is with the funding policy. Wanted to bring that to your attention and ask for your preference, and then we can make changes accordingly.
Board members, any questions?
If evergreen, I would just say that needs to be specific to, like we've talked about before, whether we're accepting those or approving those, depending on what those are. I think with assumptions, we do approve those.
That's right. That's right.
Okay.
And it's a great point. And so what I would recommend in that sentence in the middle, it starts with the actuarial assumptions. It could read the actuarial assumptions for this, assuming that's the preference of the board. The assumptions for this funding policy were developed using the most recent experience study as approved by the board. And we could take out the dates and stuff, all the other stuff, if that's.
I prefer that.
Yeah, good with them, good with me. No
I
need
did not prefer that.
Good.
I make a motion to amend the funding policy, as Ray just stated, to be more evergreen in nature, with the actuarial assumptions for this funding policy were developed using the most recent experience study approved by the board, or some language similar that's technically correct based on that process.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Any other business?
Yes, we have a few things that we wanted to cover under other, just some questions that were raised or brought up or asked to talk through. And the first one deals with a COLA. And let me make sure, because Ed Coble with CAVMAC was going to join us, and I believe he's on the phone line. Let me make sure. Ed, are you there?
I am here.
Okay. So with this one, since Ed is here, I thought we'd start with the ones that involve him. The other topics, one has to do with the first one is a question about COLA. Second one has to do with Moody's, and then an update on the recent legislative hearing, maybe going back to some discussion about the board preference on the DC side of Tier 5 and committee structure going forward. And then I think maybe one other question. With the COLA, Ed, as I remember it, the question that Dr. McCoy had mentioned had to do with, and this should be close to exact, is if Tier 5 were in effect today and we had retirees that were eligible, would the recent 11.66 investment return provide enough for a COLA? So if you could comment on that, we'd appreciate it.
Sure. So, yeah, I think how we're going to approach Tier 5 COLAs going forward, or kind of look at all the aspects of the plan in place at that time. So, and to award ad hoc COLAs as approved by the board. So I kind of take it as if we were in the situation today and we're 56% funded, then no, I would say the investment return that occurred just recently would not, a COLA should not be approved based on the funding ratio in place today. So that would be my short answer. We could certainly dig into that, looking prospectively or what. But if all aspects of the plan were in place today, then I'd say no, we wouldn't recommend a COLA.
So I'm sorry, go ahead.
So Ed, can you give us an idea of where we're talking about the starting point is there? Is that in 20 years it'd be 100%, 30 years 100%? What would you say is, if we were at that 11.7% return, let's say, and we were currently at 80% and on the road to 100% is 30 years from now or whatever, what would you say?
I mean, that's a great question. I think where we need to spend time over the next few years is developing a policy, a board policy, and a lot of retirement systems have this in place who provide ad hoc COLAs is kind of guidelines for the board to have and to consider in granting these ad hoc COLAs. So, yeah, it would come down to what is the funded ratio at the time? What is the prospective or projected funded ratio looking like? What have the past 4 years investment returns looked like? Because 11.66% investment return is a great year, but what just happened over the past 4 years prior to it could drastically change that aspect. As we all know, we smooth asset returns over a 5-year period. So we could, it all depends on that. So I think, it's hard to say 20 years from now if we'll be 80% funded and looking really good. And I know you talked about when's the first retiree gonna happen for Tier 5. But again, I think it's just a matter, I can't really place a year on it, until we know what's going to happen in investment returns and contributions. If the funding comes through, we could be talking about this in 20 years. But if it doesn't, we could be, it could be in a 30 to 40 year time horizon that we're talking about, even possibly an ad hoc COLA.
Of course, our role would just be a recommendation, because there's not the legislature has would be the.
Yes, sir, at this point, and then also.
Something were to change.
That's right. And then also, as you were discussing earlier, it will be 8 years before we have a Tier 5 retiree, and then 20 or 30 years before we have a career employee Tier 5 retiree.
And I think, going back to what the chair said, is that this board certainly has the ability to recommend it whenever there's a Tier 5 retirement group, to recommend a COLA, and the legislature at that time can make a decision, is that something they want to make an appropriation for? It's just not unreasonable to say, we're going to recommend a COLA, where's the money going to come from? Now, in my mind, I would love to see a sinking COLA fund created for Tier 5 with seed money that comes into it, because we're really 30 years away from seeing a large number of people. And I certainly do hope the funding policies and the actuarial assumptions are such that we're in a much stronger position. But if there is some type of sinking COLA fund, then you have, and the board would adopt this, but a tiered COLA system. I think Senator Bryan makes an excellent point that the COLA is not the important issue 2 years after you retire. It's an important issue after you've been retired 5 or 6, 7, 8 years, and inflation has eaten into your defined benefit piece. So, I would strongly encourage, if we had a tiered situation, that if there's a limited amount of money, that we would focus on the people that have faced the most inflation, the older retiree. But I do hope that there's consideration at some point in the legislature, as we look at funding for the system, that we also look at a potential sinking COLA fund that would operate. Of course, that money would be managed by PERS, but that would be something that would help us have more of a guarantee. But what I'd like to do is prepay for any future COLA, so that it's actuarially not a negative impact on the system.
That last part is key in that scenario, is that's funding and preparing and planning for a COLA, but not having it in the actuarial liabilities. Any other questions?
That clarifies my question. I just wanted to make sure that everyone understands that we had a good year this past year. There will be no COLA if Tier 5 was still in full of it, and if we're still 56% funded. We all know how long it's going to take for funding to get better. And we all know that until we have a revenue stream that addresses the liability, the amount that the plan sponsor owes current retirees and current actives, until we have that, my vision is there will not be a COLA for a long time into Tier 5 retirements. Now, I can't say to that whether it will or not, but I just wanted everyone to make sure. So for the next 6 years, you're probably going to have me to ask this same question, come back, just to know, because in 8 years, we will have a retiree. But that's neither here nor there. So I think you've answered my question clearly.
But
Thank you.
in general terms, we basically are doing away with a COLA for Tier 5.
I would
Well, no,
disagree.
We're getting away with penciling, having Ed Coble on the phone, pencil that number into
Yeah.
There's
perpetuity.
no guarantee. It's
That's
just
what
not guaranteed.
stops.
The
and
COLA
that's
is no
what
longer
needed to
guaranteed.
stop.
It would be contingent upon funding.
Because there's two ways to look at that. If you want to go out 8 years and reference the reality of a retiree, yes, they may exist. They will be few in number, and they will be low in benefit because they've only worked 8 years. So this board, no disrespect to CAVMAC, could still recommend a COLA 8 years from now for 73 employees that are retired for the state, and that COLA total may be $72,000. You can recommend that because of the amount of money. The legislature may say, okay, we're going to appropriate that amount of money. So I think as we work our way through it, that first few years, 8 years from now, so we're talking a 12 or 15-year window, that COLA amount would be very small. I think this board could, whatever board is here, could make a recommendation of a COLA, and the legislature then respond to that recommendation, which may be simply an appropriation because the number's so small. But I still would strongly encourage, and will strongly encourage as a legislator, to consider a sinking COLA fund at some point that is looking forward, that you then make the recommendation based on the health and assets that's in that sinking COLA fund. But I do think this board at any point has a chance, not a chance, they have the right to recommend a COLA to the legislature for Tier 5, and then the legislature can make a decision at that point. But a prepaid COLA or a fund that would be able to pay it would be my greatest hope, because if we started doing that 8, 10, 15 years from now, the growth on even small incremental payments would be significant.
My sense is that Ed has verbalized my thought that this board ought to begin to look at a policy of what will trigger us recommending a COLA, and us go ahead and begin to develop that now so that we can check off the boxes as the funded portion goes higher and returns, just have those check boxes that we can look at, just as we look at our funding policy to help us make recommendations now on the ADEC and what funding we need to the legislature. The exact same thing. So I'm all in favor of us beginning to look at the COLA funding policy.
Well, I got a question. It sounds simple, but it's complex. How do we hire people then in March? How do we hire people without a carrot on the stick saying we're not going to offer you a COLA? Yeah, we may say, hey, we'll do it 8 years down the road, but people don't normally trust government, and they don't trust a promise 8 years down the road that's not already guaranteed in some form or fashion. So how do I hire people at the Treasury? How does Chris over here hire people at DOR? But more importantly, the firefighters and policemen and ambulance drivers and first responders who've come to me and say, we won't teachers. We won't recommend this job to anybody because we don't have a cost of living adjustment coming forward to come March 1st, 2026. So we're not going to recommend this to anybody. So how do we hire people without some guarantee?
Well, that probably doesn't need to be your lead in, because that's not a real reflection of the situation. The more negativity that we put on Tier 5, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. We have vacancies currently in the state of Mississippi already. Tier 4 is not the carrot that is filling the vacancies. That's reality in a lot of these professions, particularly in law enforcement. I think the social issues, I think the disrespect for authority, for leadership, somebody whipping out their cell phone and sticking it in your face while you're trying to do your job, those are hard jobs already. I'm having small group meetings across the state with employers to try to, number one, make sure that they understand how the system's supposed to work. Because if we can at least agree on the facts of how the system works, and we're not there yet, that then they can ask questions that specifically address that. But using the term "there's no COLA" is a misrepresentation of the legislature's intent when it clearly carved out that there is ad hoc COLAs, which is exactly what we're talking about, that this board can recommend, knowing that we are 15 to 20 years away from any significant COLAs. And I would ask Ed, and I've actually asked, those are the types of questions that I hope we're asking. And I think Dr. McCoy, in saying, hey, we want a policy, we want to make sure we're committed to this. I think that's how you move forward. But for telling people you're never going to get a cost of living adjustment, I think is a misrepresentation of the intent of Tier 5, excuse me. And the other thing is, and all the people who are commenting on Tier 5 are not Tier 5 employees. They're Tier 1 through 4. And this board for 2 years recommended a Tier 5 because of the 56% funded ratio, because of the concern of the solvency of the system. And everything we've done, we have done with Tier 1 through 4 in mind, and that's the fiduciary duty that this board has. And I can go ahead and tell you, nobody wants this hot potato. If y'all think I ran to the front of the line and said, hand me the ball, no. But I will say this, there are folks who did not have Tier 1 through 4's best interest in mind that were going to drive the legislation. So good, bad, or indifferent, it's attached to my name. And I want my name attached to funding. And I hope I live long enough that I see the employer rate and the employee rate come down. And you want to talk about funding a COLA? When we're not paying 19.9, you look at it in the future and the actuary says, boys, y'all can go down 3 points. We're at the target. Guess what I'm going to say? If I have to come in here on my walker, don't go down 3, go down 2, and put that other one in the sinking COLA fund. So I ride up and down the road and I take calls, no matter who texts me, no matter who sends me a Facebook message, I call them. And this past week, Mr. Treasurer, I had a very kind person reach out. I called them. They were shocked. They said, I'm not your constituent. Maybe you don't want to talk to me. I said, no, sir. I learned something from you. You know what I learned? The newest rumor out there was that the legislature was not in the tier. We were in the Highway Patrol retirement. Now, I don't know how you work to motivate people to understand that what we're trying to do is make the public employees retirement system solvent, because prior legislators gave benefits without funding. That is the crux of it all. They gave benefits without funding. What we're trying to do is have the best benefit package we can have with the underfunded, outstanding liabilities that we have that can grow and be built to be the best retirement system we can afford that we have paid for.
Well, it's not being negative. I'm being a realist. There is, and nowhere in that legislation does it tell me that there is a COLA. So I can't go lie to the people in Issaquena. I can't go lie to the people in Sharkey and tell them, well, there's a COLA, but there's not. That comes back on me and my constituents or the state. And I can't tell them that. I mean, I can say, hey, the board may give you a COLA one day, but I can't promise them that. And yeah, police, ambulance, firefighters, first responders have other social pressures, but there are generational people who do continue to be those in that industry. But let's just talk about the Treasury. There are reasons that those gaps are, and this is beyond this board's scope, but I mean, it does affect the board. There are reasons those jobs aren't filled at the Treasury is because they're not paid a lot. So we don't pay people a lot in the state of Mississippi, regular employees, even though y'all did give them a pay raise, it's still underneath. But y'all don't pay people enough, so we have to promise them something, a carrot on the stick, essentially to continue to work for the state. And if I can't promise them a COLA, then they're going to go somewhere else, whether or not they want to work for the state. People like working for the state. They like the health benefits. They like the pension. They like the hours, so for whatever reason. There's various sundry of different reasons. But if I can't promise them a guaranteed some form of COLA, it becomes extremely difficult to hire people, which will then affect this board and the people who are paying into PERS. It's a trickle-down effect. And, I mean, there are people who, I'll go all around the state, and there are people who are very concerned with the pension. There are kids coming out of school who will be graduating in May of next year who want to be a teacher. They love being, they really want to be a teacher, and I'm glad for that. But they are having problems now whether or not they'll go into private education, teaching private education, or leave the state because they are not guaranteed a COLA. Because these are the people who will be staying a teacher for 35, 32, whatever, how long it is at this point, staying that long. So, I mean, we got to find a way to have a COLA. I mean, that's the bottom line.
Well, that's some of the very things that we're discussing. But again, when you say you in your reference in the legislature, the majority of employees in PERS are not state employees. They're local employees. They're municipal employees, the fire, the police you talk about, school teachers or district employees, and the very people who yelled out in unison when this board voted to go to 22.4% on the contribution rate were the cities and the counties and privately the school districts, because they didn't believe they could afford it. So somebody does have to pay for it. The easiest thing for me to do as a legislator is to promise a benefit and let somebody else worry about it 20 years down the road. That's been the hardest part of this, is trying to craft something that is sustainable, that is beneficial to the system. And, you know, once again, I go back to the assumptions that are adopted. What can happen? Likely, you talk about low pay, we raise pay. What does raising pay do to the unfunded actuarial liability? We get hit immediately at the pay raise for 30-year extrapolation for the employee's work history and 30 more for their retirement, but we only get the benefit of the contribution in the sliver annually that comes in, because higher payroll brings in more of a contribution from the employer and employee. But we take the hit on the liabilities, and I think this board recently recognized, I think it was a $1.2 billion hit to the liabilities because we had given raises in excess of the 2.65% that the actuaries had assumed. And that is the thing that's so counterintuitive as we talk about pay raises for the state of Mississippi. Yes, I would love to see pay raises for a lot of people, but once again, that is a negative actuarial event on the unfunded liability. So I think that, and I think we'll end up talking about Moody's and some of these other things. CAVMAC has run numbers. When you look at the totality of the impact of Tier 5, 1.89% more of the contribution going toward the unfunded liability. When you look at the ORP reform, that is going to be $7 to $10 million in year one, growing $3 to $5 million each year thereafter, that is going to pay off the unfunded liability. The revenue stream that I believe the legislature is committed to pass this year, a significant revenue stream, will help pay that unfunded liability. Everything we do, in my hope, moves us toward a higher funded percentage, lower unfunded actuarial liabilities, that opens the door for the COLA that is stated in Tier 5, that is ad hoc, and again, this board can recommend on an annual basis to the legislature, and then the legislature will take the heat that year. So, you know, as a board member, you're welcome to make the motion every year for a COLA, and if you get a vote, then here comes the board's recommendation to the legislature, and the legislature can respond to that. But I think it's a little bit misleading when we use the terms no COLA. There is not a guaranteed COLA that will be paid if the health of the system is negative. If we went back to 1998, this board actually would have had to look at the health of the system. Your actuary just said, even with 11.66 return, he would not recommend to you to pay a COLA this year. If this board still had the COLA decision, y'all probably wouldn't have given the COLAs that had been given over the past 25 years. But the legislature, and by the way, the one person not to blame in any of this are employees. They did the work. The rules were made by the legislature, by the board. The actuaries made the assumptions, and we are where we are. But I'm very hopeful. I'm trying to be positive that we are stabilizing the employment system for those tier 1 through 4 people who we've already made a commitment and agreement to. And yes, tier 5 will know what their agreement is on the front end, but the optional variable contribution is a big piece of that. You at your office would have the opportunity, if you're trying to hire someone and they can make more in the private world, that you could look and say, hey, an optional variable contribution, I'll give you X amount of dollars for 4 years. And of course, the people you're hiring probably going to understand the time value of money and the benefit of tax deferred income better than anyone. But you have that opportunity to do that. Or someone's going to leave you and go into the private sector. You as an employer have the opportunity to come in and say, I'll give you X in your defined contribution as an optional variable contribution if you'll stay with me for more years. And I've had that conversation with employers in law enforcement and in other places, and when they see the tools in their toolbox that they don't have today, that is something that potentially will be utilized. So there's multiple ways that we are trying to make Tier 5 to be a good retirement system. But, you know, overcoming the negativity is difficult. I certainly don't think it's a perfect plan, but I think it is a plan that put us on a pathway towards solvency. And the plan we were on, this board has repeatedly said, is not something that's sustainable.
I do think one of the good benefits of what you all passed is the ability to make the additional contributions. Is that what we call it in the plan document? I don't remember.
That's right. I think it's the optional and variable on the DC side. I think is what you're talking about.
Are there some restrictions on what employers may do on that side of things that will be kind of given the nuts and bolts of eventually?
Yes, and the way it was reflected yesterday is it talks about an agreement or a participation agreement, I think, to be submitted and reviewed annually. Of course, we'll be in the process of developing that, but that would be the avenue that would outline the particulars of how that would work.
So if you negotiate, for instance, with an employee, and that's what Ms. Lee said yesterday, you would reduce that to writing. The employee knows what the commitment is, and you are able to do it as you, as an operator of your entity, whether you're a superintendent or whether you're a head of an agency, would be able to say, this is my need. And we may have, you know, that gets you around SEC squared. That gets you around some of the things that restrict you, because this is an optional variable contribution into the DC. I also think the legislature could use it as a tool to encourage people to go. You know, we've always tried to talk about our participation in deferred comp because we know the value of it. But, you know, if we're having trouble hiring, we'll have to address those issues. It may be pay raise increases. It also may be the legislature appropriating money in a particular area. If you say it's K-12 education or it's police and fire, that actually puts a lump sum of money that can be used as match money, you know, that the local entities can use. But one of the things I do want to make clear is we approach funding from the state, from the general treasury, is that the debt that is owed, as this board well knows, is not the state's debt. It's the employer's debt. And each employer, as y'all well know, it's on the website, has their percentage of the net pension liability, and those numbers are staggering to a lot of these local districts. GASB requires they have that on their balance sheet. It affects their ability to bond. So any money that the legislature puts toward paying off this unfunded actuarial liability, to a great degree, is going to local governments in a higher percentage, just like a local project bill, if you will, because we're paying off their portion of the debt as we do that. So, which I'm fine with, because in my opinion, the legislature made this mess.
Back to Dr. McCoy's point, I think to me, it's a little bit premature it's a little early to worry about all the intricate policies and things like that, but a sinking fund, other ideas on how to fund this now, knowing that it's coming. It's just a question of if and when, potentially. I think that is important, though. I mean, because the seed money and the legal pieces of that are important. does the board have the authority to start and just carve out and take some of this 35 billion and stick over here in a seed fund for a COLA that is not currently authorized except through requesting it? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But getting some of those details out of the way to figure out how can something like that or something else happen? And, I mean, that is something the PERS board can do, is ask the legislature to fund a sinking fund. It wouldn't be a huge amount of money, probably. And then, is that a good idea? I don't know. I mean, these are questions I think that the board should address and figure out how to kind of deal with preparing for 30 years.
And it will take away the argument of there's no COLA.
And no action.
That's
to try
correct.
to get an ad hoc, basically foundation in place for having something potentially. It's just maybe again a question of when could you start paying a COLA?
So the property-rich counties and cities, since the additional COLA would come from local taxes most likely, for that additional COLA. So if you've got property-rich cities, counties, whatever, then they could go to their public and say, in order for us to get the employees that we need for our first responders, our police, our fire department, for schools, whatever, we would want to take part of your local tax dollars and give a COLA.
I don't know that they could give a COLA. I'm not, I mean, I don't,
Well,
do you mean COLA or you mean optional variable contribution?
Add it to the 5%.
The DC.
The DC, oh,
DC
certainly,
side.
certainly.
They could do that. So the property-rich districts could influence, they could get employees and reduce the surrounding counties or cities in their ability because they don't have the property to
We
fund
do it,
those.
we do it
Dr.
now.
McCoy, you have supplements
We do it
today.
now.
The like local supplements
I
are
mean,
based on ad valorem taxes.
That's not anything that's new. We do that. That happens now. If, you may want to, Lee County may pay more than Prentice County.
Yeah.
And we'll hire a police officer, a deputy from Prentice because we can pay them more.
So that's the reality of what's happening now, property-rich or.
That's PERS, no PERS, no anything.
Okay.
That's a reality you see now.
Yeah, well, and for any audience that may be listening, that has nothing to do with what I was just saying.
No, I understand.
The Oxford School
That's a
District
different-
just gave $1 million in raises. They have a wonderful school district. They have a growing city, tax base, whatever, but that was recently disclosed. They gave $1 million, across the board in raises. That's something that's out of my control. And the thing I don't want to do is micromanage local school districts, local or state agencies, but the tools are there. The tools are in their toolbox. Now, if, the concern is, well, there's some people that won't be able to activate those tools. Those people are already in that position today in the sense that if they're ad valorem taxes, if they're maxed out on their millage, they're maxed out on their millage. The other thing, and, this is not a legislative action, but, we've heard a lot about property assessments recently, being adjusted and going up. So, those things are part of the equation. Investment into this state, $26 billion in data centers and other economic development changes the ad valorem tax base. I would love to see more and more of this, especially as it relates to energy. Met last night with people in the energy world, and that investment that they're making into counties that are maybe not as ad valorem successful is a way that funding's out there. But at the end of the day, that local employer has that tool in the toolbox to be able to utilize, and that was part of the intention in Tier 5, which is also integral in calculating what somebody's future benefit is, because when somebody tries to go out and say, well, here's the DC and here's what they'll make and this is what their future benefit will be, you don't know if that person is going to annuitize that defined contribution. You don't know if they're going to let it grow for years after they retire. You also don't know what optional variable contributions they're going to receive So the crystal ball is not as clear when you start talking about what the future looks like for a Tier 5 employee, but I can assure you the tools are there that they can have a very solid retirement. And if we make the right decisions going forward as it relates to PERS in the funding policies as well as in the health of the system, then sure, that COLA is there. I think it's the right thing to do. Again, I go back to Senator Bryan. I think prioritization, if you have limited funds, you prioritize it. And I think that, again, is a discussion for the future for this board to say, here's what we think is important as we move forward. But the main thing is, and to the treasurer's point, is, beginning March 1st, 2026, the state of Mississippi will still function. We will still have schools, we will still have law enforcement, and we will move forward. And the challenges that are out there, we will address, and we will address with our local employers. And, I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but I remind you of the people who did not accept your 22-4 recommendation of an employer rate are the same local officials that have hiring responsibilities.
To your point, Senator Sparks, and I think it's important for the board to not really take any action on a sinking fund or request for a sinking fund or anything too early, because the PERS board asked for $50 million, let's just throw a number out there, for a sinking fund for a COLA for Tier 5. I'm not responsible for Tier 5 folks. They're not here yet. There's nobody in there. Now what am I doing? Tier 1 through 4 is who I'm requesting something on behalf of that is now for somebody I do not cover. So I think the timing of this is important to not get too early in the process of it, because the point is to preserve the DB, and that's 1 through 4. And especially right now until March 1st, because the legislature is going to come back in session. Who knows what could happen? And so to get way ahead of that could be detrimental to the board, I think, anyway.
Well, definitely
It's worth
agree.
discussing. And it's worth discussing the legalities of those pieces. May even be a good educational piece to say, here's where you have to be careful, and if there's any timing with that, with the Tier 5 implementation.
Sure. Well, I definitely agree with focusing on current funding and existing funding. And one of the things I was going to mention from the hearing last week was putting the first things first, or keeping our eye on the ball, which is funding for the existing plan. And another good aspect, I think what we just heard was a lot of support for PERS, maybe in different approaches in different ways, but a lot of support for PERS. And with that, I certainly don't want to shorten anything, but if it's okay with the chairman, in the interest of time, I'll just go ahead and move on to the next one, if that's all right. The next topic was Moody's. I was asked to comment on a recent publication from Moody's, one of the bond rating agencies. This information is not in the board materials, but it's a sheet that I emailed around recently. And I'll unpack this more and describe it more, but the way I would sum it up is, in my own words, I would say that it said a lot of the same things that we've been saying. Basically that Tier 5 is good reform that will help long-term, but we need additional funding. And without the funding, it increases the risk exposure to volatile investments, and the ADEC funding would help mitigate that risk. That's a shorter version of summarizing that. So again, like we said before, Tier 5 will help, but it's long-term. We still need additional funding. That's my one-line summary, I guess, of the Moody's report. To unpack and explain it a little bit more, and Ed with CAVMAC should still be on the line. The headline read something to the effect of the lower contribution rate increases the risk exposure to volatile investments, which I would say I think that's the case. And what they're talking about throughout that, and a lot of the information, I don't want to speak directly to Moody's numbers, even though oftentimes they use some of our numbers and our public information from actuarial reports, from the annual financial reports and so forth. Occasionally they do their own projections or use their own assumptions, so it depends. But one of their main aspects from memory had to do with what they refer to as non-investment cash flow. You may hear me call it cash flow or pension cash flow, and that may be reflected in there as well. And again, with Ed with CAVMAC I'm going to ask him to comment before we finish. What I would say, that's one of the cash flow metrics that is important. It is also, when we talk about the cash flow or the cash flow metric, what we're doing is taking the benefits that we pay out, which you've heard us say that's over $3 billion annually now, and comparing that to the contributions that come in from the employees and the employer, not reflective of investment income, and looking at that. And that matches up when you've heard us say that, or many of you have said, when I say we or us, I'm talking about PERS, board staff and otherwise. When we pay out over $1 billion more than we collect each year, all those things go together. So that is, we're referring to the same thing or the same dynamic. And we do have a negative cash flow. We do pay out more than we collect in the pension context, that is. We do pay out more in benefits than we collect in contributions. And that's not to be unexpected from a mature retirement system such as PERS. We've been around over 70 years. We have many retirees on the payroll. So that's not to be unexpected. It just has to be monitored and managed, which is why the board several years ago created the additional metric in the funding policy, which is the cash flow metric. So that's something very key that we've been monitoring for years. The other thing they pointed out in there is something I believe they called asset to benefit or benefit to asset coverage. And they indicated in their view that it was one of the riskier combinations with that negative pension cash flow I just described compared to the asset to benefit coverage. And what they're doing there, that's more of a metric that they use. But they're looking at the annual benefit payments and comparing that to the existing assets and how long would the existing assets cover that if all things stayed the same. And so to summarize and conclude my part before I refer to Ed, if he'd like to add any of that or amend any of that, it's like I mentioned in the beginning, I think they're saying a lot of the same things that we've said and that others have said, which is Tier 5, very helpful, necessary reform that will help long-term, but we still need funding. And when you have the lesser contribution rate, it exposes your risk to the volatility of investments. And that's the summary. And so with that, Ed, would you like to confirm or comment further on any of that? And I'd be happy to answer any questions afterwards, too.
Yeah, no, you hit the high points, Ray. And it's nice, sometimes these publications, when they come out, when they're interpolating results or, taking results from our evaluations, it's kind of worrisome for us that they're accurately portraying the picture. But a lot of the numbers that they have are straight from our report. Like Ray said, that cash flow, we added that as a metric years ago because, of CAVMAC's concern with it and the funding of the plan. And their numbers are pretty much right on with our numbers that we've been showing you at the presentations where, the cash flow currently is at negative 4.7% as a percentage of as a percentage of assets. But with the current funding mechanism in place, that negative cash flow is going to be heading towards that negative 7%. I think the report was done well. It was a little bit, couple differences from our numbers, but overall, I think it really, I think the point of it mostly, as Ray said, was that PERS needs more funding.
And the good news is when we get to the next topic of the legislative hearing, I think there's very positive sentiment toward additional funding toward PERS. I'll pause on that for later. I did want to mention that there seems to be a lot of momentum building for that, which we appreciate.
And for the people that didn't hear the other day, the treasurer did a very good job on Super Talk speaking to that.
Appreciate it.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I would say one other thing that you have mentioned and talked about, but if y'all remember in 2023, the board recommended raising contribution rates to the ADEC, and Moody's did address that when they said that Mississippi's pullback on contribution increases will materially hamper pension asset accumulation, and Moody's projects that our unfunded liability will grow to $32 billion by the end of 2035. And I think that's taken straight out of our numbers that we have. And they are saying, Moody's is saying that non-investment contribution must increase. That's what they're saying. And that's what we're saying, that we have to have an additional funding stream. So, besides Moody's, there's other rating agencies, and I'd like to ask the treasurer, if we are hearing similar things from other rating agencies as to Moody's about the things that Moody's did mention, because I haven't seen those.
Yeah, they haven't officially, that's what I have all in front of me at the moment. They haven't officially said it, but they have indicated that Moody's, I anticipate Moody's will probably downgrade us, if we do not fund PERS in a significant manner. For those who didn't listen to Super Talk, what I said is that one-time payments do not work. It needs a consistent revenue source. I asked CAFMAC to give me I call it a menu of revenue sources, not revenue sources, amounts for consistent revenue sources. The best of the worst was 200 million, and that would get us by 200 million in perpetuity. That would get us to roughly around 73 point something percent by 2050-ish. The problem with the issue with the rating agencies and why I care so much about it is for the last several years, they have been saying that PERS, us, state, we don't pay anything down on our liability. Other states do. And I have, after the pandemic, almost every other state except two, New Jersey and Illinois, started contributing money to their pension, whether it was through surplus revenue or a consistent revenue source or both. And we were one of the three, Mississippi, New Jersey, and Illinois. Those are the three. The rest all did start to contribute money to their pension funds, and therefore they got upgraded or stabilized. Most got upgraded as a result. New Jersey got downgraded from a AA to BBB2 or something like that, which is almost the worst you can possibly get. The thing is, PERS has a direct impact on our borrowing power, which is what Moody's is saying. And Tier 5, even though it stopped the bleeding and didn't continue to hire new employees that would continue the bleeding, Moody's is essentially saying, and the long or the short of it is that it didn't really fix anything. It started something new, which will be great in 20 years, but we need to add, we still have $23 to $26 billion worth of liabilities that we don't pay anything down on. Think about using your credit card and continuing to collect interest on your credit card and not paying it down. It's irresponsible. So that's what Moody's is saying. I had somebody run some numbers this morning, and to think of it, if we get downgraded to AA, right now Moody's says we're AA negative outlook, and they downgrade us to AA or down 1 notch down. That's essentially 10 basis points. Right now our debt is roughly about $500 million. We paid last year $500 million in debt services, so that's a lot of money that we would have to pay. We borrow $4 billion a year for projects right now we have outstanding. So that is roughly $4 million. It would be 10 basis points if we went down 1 notch, so that'd be roughly $4 million, if I did the math correctly, of borrowing, of added expense that we would have to do. So it is utterly important to me, and that should be to the board and to the legislature and to everybody that borrows anything to build projects, that we find some solution to have a consistent revenue source for PERS in some form or fashion.
I just want to share with those in the legislature that are proposing and supporting finding continued non-investment contributions to come, that it's not just this board that recognizes that, and we support those in the legislature, and our supporters across the state recognize that and support the legislators that are addressing that. We have recommended that for several years. Fund it, find a way, and I suspect as we get near the legislative session, this board will probably do something like that again.
So for fun, I ran some numbers, and if we put at just 7%, my recommendation is really 7% with some surplus revenue when we have it. But let's just say we don't use surplus revenue. Let's say we just use 200 million at our modest 7% return, not using our 11%. So, and for the most part, we always hit 7% roughly, or above. But in 10 years, at $200 million, inserting $200 million, we will make $1.3 billion, $1.33 billion in returns if we use that money. That would go into PERS. That would be, I think, what the rating agencies are looking for is some commitment by the state that's large enough a commitment. So, I mean, like $2 isn't going to work. So, you know, a large, consistent commitment to that program, to paying off our debt, even though we're never going to pay it off, but to pay towards it will stabilize the credit rating, which will allow us in the future when we need to borrow money, borrow it at a good rate. So, like I said, 10 years, roughly about $1.33 billion.
And I think the legislature certainly appreciates that, and whether Moody's does it or CAVMAC or the Treasurer's Office, the math is the math. You know, that's pretty straightforward. One of the things, just in consideration, we've paid off a little over $1 billion worth of bond indebtedness. I think $3.5 billion maybe is what we have on the books, something in that neighborhood. And we'll have more paid off, because I think this year maybe we paid off 300 some odd million. You got a $500 million payment, and I think we bonded or gave authority for maybe 100. So we had a $200 million net improvement. Well, each year your bond payment that the state is making goes down if your principal goes down. Don't think I'm not looking at the payment, because this is in the equivalency of a debt, a future debt, a liability, that when we have paid off bond indebtedness, we don't have that much of a bond payment. Your bond payment goes down. That may be a source for PERS revenue. Now, there may come a point in the future where the state has to go back to borrowing money. I think that's probably inevitable for infrastructure projects and things of that magnitude. But using the treasurer's analogy, I think, is excellent with your credit card. The only thing I would go one step further is if you're just paying the minimum and the interest is accruing on you, that's bad. What's worse is making new purchases. And the spread between the cash flow is approximately equal to the COLA. So we know, again, it's a math issue, but we know where it's coming from. It is the COLA. But that's an obligation that's been made. So the only side of the coin I'm willing to try to address is funding, because I'm not going to cut benefits. So those are the only two things. A lot of times when you read these reports, you know, they're not from Mississippi, you know, and they don't care how we balance the books. Moody's just want to be balanced. This board cares, the legislature cares, and more funding is needed. I think more funding's coming. I think you will see, again, updates every time this happens. The picture gets a little better. Does it get exactly where we want it? Absolutely not, but it gets better. So I appreciate that information as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, Daniel's right. You know, we will start having to borrow money soon. We sit on the largest surplus of money the state's ever had in the history. And probably, I mean, it's great. And we should be using some of that surplus today to start paying down this debt in some form or fashion. But we will have to start borrowing money in the future. And I'd rather borrow it at the cheapest interest rate we possibly can do it, because you know, we're going to want to build roads and bridges. And when Lee County can't build a bridge that's fallen down because it costs too much, that's going to be a problem.
Mr. Higgins, you have anything else? I'm sorry, go ahead.
One, maybe, I don't know if I misread this, but it seemed like it had something about that asset to liabilities ratio that they did. It wasn't really the ratio, but it was the assets they were using. It said in the next 10 years, meaning I guess at the end of that 10-year span, and I think the discussion, the what they were trying to inform was that the hybrid would end up having less money coming in, which is true for that 5% that now on the employee end would not be coming into the fund. But that seems like a small amount of money compared to the employer stays at 19.9 eventually, all of that. But it would grow only from 36 billion to 38 billion or something like that. And I don't know if I misread it, but I thought $2 billion, we just made that last year. I mean, that would be, even at 7%, that seemed like it seemed like it was way understated compared to what we would expect.
Well, we'd have to go back and look at the details, but I think the main part of that is just pointing out the same thing we've also said many times, is the longer this goes, the more it costs and harder it gets, and the gap continues to widen. Maybe this would help. I think what they were doing is just a simplistic ratio of taking the assets, for example, 35 billion, and taking the current benefits, whichever number, 3 billion, 3 point, whatever, and just dividing that and showing how many years. I want to say they were saying it was currently, that ratio was around 9.2 years, but it would go down to 7, like you said. I'm not sure. I'd have to go back and look at it on the nuance of that.
I'd like to talk to you about it at some
Yeah.
point to see. Maybe I've just misread it, but it seemed like over the next 10 years, I wouldn't expect that 36 would only be 38.
But the main point,
7%.
Sure.
Assumed rate of return.
And they may have been using different assumptions, but the main point being that, you know, benefits continue to grow, and right now we're still have a contribution deficiency, and the more years go by, the more that may widen.
Right, okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anything else, Mr. Higgins?
No, sir, on that, I'll just move to the legislative hearing if we could. And I think this was a good lead-in to that. As many of you know, there's a House Select Committee on PERS. They had their first meeting, and we talked to them for the first time late last week. And how I would sum that up is I thought overall the meeting went well. I think the main focus was on funding. I emphasized funding. To unpack that a little bit further, there was a representative from the Alabama system that spoke on their system a little bit. There was a representative from the Reason Foundation who explained some of their analysis. And then we were the third guest, and like I said, the main focus there was funding. And I explained that and the past actions of the board, and the ADEC, and the amounts, and with an emphasis mainly on funding, and for us, implementation of Tier 5. How I would sum it up, there were a handful of questions, but a handful of questions, including one on investment fees, but nothing really too new or surprising based on the information you already have. What I would say, and I alluded to it earlier, is a lot of positive sentiment toward funding. And so I appreciate the comments of all the board members and legislative designees. I appreciate the comments from Senator Sparks and Treasurer McCray. It seems like there's a lot of support for PERS funding. Now, I'll pause a minute and say it's still early. We'll wait, in the analysis or the description or the feedback or the tone could change come January or February. Because can't predict the future, can't guarantee anything, and nothing surprises me. But with that said, I feel really optimistic about additional funding for PERS. As many of you have said or implied this morning, I feel really optimistic about the potential for additional funding for PERS in a significant and recurring way. Don't know exactly what that will be, but that's certainly what it seems like now, which I think is a very good thing and very necessary. And I would say, from our standpoint, my recommendation would be that we continue our message nicely. I mean, to help, support, encourage, appreciate, and again, continue our message nicely, because it does seem like there's a lot of support for funding PERS, and I greatly appreciate that. I hope that continues. I appreciate the folks in the room and others. And that was said as much. I know many of you are familiar with that, but just to share a little bit, just a few things, and I don't mean to leave anybody out, but as you know, the speaker has been in the press and in the public many times on additional funding for PERS. The Lieutenant Governor has been quoted for additional funding for PERS. The legislators in the room, and Senator Sparks in particular, as he said earlier, is supporting funding for PERS. And in the committee meeting, there was and Chairman Benson was there as well, Mr. Breland in the audience, so certainly defer to any comments that he may want to share. But it just seemed, even said in the meeting from the beginning with the chairman and the co-chairman, about an emphasis for funding. So I'll pause now. I think I probably said that enough, but I anticipate at least one more meeting between now and session, but it seemed to be a very collaborative type approach, and the funding being a main theme, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I think that, I appreciate you letting the board members know that this meeting was occurring. And certainly the board is appreciative of those that spoke up there for, funding and additional, non-investment funding coming our way. I would encourage you as the executive director to communicate these kinds of meetings that happen with the legislature, that you would communicate them not just to the board, but you would send it out to all the members, to our support people, MRPEA, REPM, the Mississippi Education Association, Mississippi Professional Educators. Those people want to support the system and the legislators that are working for this additional funding, but they need to have the opportunity to sit and hear firsthand the things that are going on in these meetings between PERS and the legislature. So I would encourage you to develop a communication stream between all of those. I mean, we've got on our website that little thing that we send out. What is that little thing that what's that called? Update, what?
PERS updates.
PERS updates, yes. We could do that and send it out and say, you know, PERS, I'm meeting with Elbow tomorrow afternoon, or I'm meeting with whomever. Just send it out. Let everybody know so that we will have people there that supporting the system and supporting legislators that are working to support the system as well. So I would just encourage you to develop that communication stream.
I think that's a great idea. You know, it's a PR battle at this, and I mean battle in a good sense, because if Daniel's going to be giving out his number to everybody, all the educators are going to be calling him about it. So we'd like, you know, them to be truthful when they're talking to you. And, you know, and there's so much misinformation. I mean, and you and I've talked about this many of times, you know, on Facebook, Reddit, or anywhere else you go, and you get a bunch of people and, you know, one person says the wrong thing, then it just cascades into everybody knowing the wrong thing. And we spend months, if not years, trying to figure out how to make that correct. And I applaud the legislature for having these hearings. I think this is the best relationship it seems like PERS and the legislature have ever had at this point. That's good. And I think everybody's working towards a common goal. Just got to figure out how to get there.
And I will say Chairman Zuber was very gracious. He invited me to attend the meeting. Also, the House does an excellent job in comms. Those meetings, they put that out on social media, so it's pretty accessible to anyone. But of course, obviously sharing that in some capacity on your website, I'm sure is welcome in the public hearing. The couple of interesting things that came out of Alabama was that their graphs and charts look a lot like ours. They suffered in 08, they suffered the .com. The one big difference, they're at 65% funded, which we'd love to be at 65% funded, but their assumed rate of return is still 7.45. So if they had adopted 7%, they would be just about in the same boat we're in. They've got a few more $1 billion, a little bit bigger state. But the other thing that I took away was that when they do a funding policy, they have never put direct funds in. They have never done lump sum. They just pass it along with employers. And they have about 7 different classes of employers, have a separate judiciary, a separate teacher, separate first responder, state employees. And again, I go back to, you know, this board obviously has stated they need funding. The math says they need funding. And the last effort you made to raise funding, again, it was the employers that at the city and county levels that said we can't get there. And in Alabama, it appeared to me, and Mr. Higgins, correct me if I'm wrong, is they do it kind of on a 5-year wave, because I asked about the assumed rate of return because they have the same actuaries we have. And, you know, they said they're trying to stair step it and all the different things, but ultimately they're passing it along directly to the local employers, unless I misunderstood that.
That's my memory, and Ed can certainly confirm this, but I think they use 5-year smoothing like we do, What I think he's referring to is when we do the experience study every 2 years, I believe Alabama does it every 5 years. The last time they did it was 2020, so they're further out there. And I think she said basically that the actuary calculates an ADEC, which is submitted to the legislature, and then they fund it, which in effect gets passed on to the employers, I think is what he's referring to, and she said.
And one of the other differences is after the last experience study we did for RSA, Alabama RSA, is they phased in their contribution, their assumption changes that we made 5 years ago. So they're paying their ADEC where they're phasing in the increases. So it is increasing every year.
Well, I did have, I may have just misread it, but it seemed like some media out there was like Alabama had kind of fixed their pension. It was ready, and the numbers I saw, it was like, no, it looks like they're about where we're at, except for this funding piece.
That's right.
Yeah, I didn't think I'd just love to go over there and do what they're doing. It sounds like they've complicated everything that Tier 5 may end up complicating, meaning all these pockets of different people getting, they had a much more complicated looking system.
And they also had no guaranteed COLA.
Yeah, that's correct.
There
Yeah,
you
they had the same COLA we have in that it's an ad hoc, and it has worked for them. But again,
Well, factor that in.
yes,
Factor that into the 65%.
that's right.
And
So,
here you go.
Yeah, and they'd never had the compounded interest.
that's right. So
And
they
if I
would
were-
be at 56
They probably did 40.
or worse.
I mean, who knows?
If I remember right, I don't know if they'd had a guaranteed COLA since around '07. I don't want to speak to their numbers or information, but it was something like that, not counting.
Sounds about right.
Is that about, okay. all right.
Well, and did I read it correctly or hear it correctly? Did they only made 8% last year, 9%, or did I mishear that?
We would have to look at it, but I think they actually made much more than
Okay.
that.
Or was that on their land,
They're-
on their property?
They're on a different fiscal year.
Okay,
than
yeah,
you all.
okay.
They're September 30th.
September 30th.
You know,
Hard
you were looking at, like the funded status of everybody else. Everybody's kind of lumped up. It's just we're a little bit lower than everybody else. Everybody's kind of in the same boat.
Their 40-year rate of return was 8.34, so it's very similar to where we are. The only huge difference is they manage their own investments in-house, and that was interesting. But that's the way they've done it, so.
Were they a social security state?
Excuse me.
Sorry.
I'd have to check, I don't know.
Look at the number of employees that takes to manage your investments in-house. And I think that that's one of the things in the past that has precluded us from doing that. Plus, when you do that, what we're allowed to pay our chief investment officer does not come close, I mean, to what it is on the market out there. So there's some other issues that go with in-house management as well that we looked at. But, well, back when we were looking for replacement to pass.
Yeah, she got asked several questions about that, and that was not what she was there to testify about. It was more so the health of the system, funding, and things of that magnitude. But those were kind of the takeaways. But again, I think as many people have stated, they're in about the same situation we're in.
Well, and with a less rich and
They are
retirement
exactly.
system, as far as I can tell.
I checked on, when I heard that the Alabama guy went on NASRA and went on to the research and looked at that, and I thought, gee, I don't know why he's over here sitting there talking. I mean, he's just, but anyway, that was just my thought. I apologize.
It's because they're very proud of their golf course that I see on TV all the time.
Well, I will say this, the shock of the day was when she talked about property that they own and that they were gonna build a new steakhouse for legislators. And I literally looked to my right and looked to my left, and half the people in the room heard steakhouse. It was State House. She clarified later, because apparently since the 80s, they've been in a temporary building because the remodeling wasn't there. So I thought, man, they've got some confidence if they're building a legislative steakhouse, but thankfully it was State House.
And fun fact, I mean, I'm killing Tom, but fun fact is they have to pass a referendum to do it.
Oh, wow.
Could you imagine the people of Mississippi voting on you getting a new steak or steakhouse?
That y'all steakhouse would do well, though.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm not sponsoring that bill, so.
Just a guess on my part. I don't know.
Well, if okay to move on, the only other one I recall is just following up on something that briefly came up yesterday about the board preference for where to handle the DC side of the Tier 5 hybrid as far as some of the governance. And the short summary is it really just boils down to board preference, I think. What we're talking about is things like we talked about yesterday, the investment lineup for Tier 5, the DC side, and plan document, things like that going forward. The plan document, and again, certainly defer to however the board prefers, but the plan document, as you know, yesterday was in the DC committee. The investment lineup was in the investment committee. And just think through going forward how you would prefer. What I will share with you that may help, that wasn't on there yesterday, are the investment policies. And we'll be coming back to you for those in October. A couple of reasons as why we didn't do it yesterday, because in the recent past, we've done that in August, was just the length of the agenda being one, with more items than normal. And then also waiting to get the investment lineup approved for the DC side of the hybrid, so we could include that in the investment policy or create one. There's been some discussion internally on where to have both of those, and we, as a suggestion, which can certainly be changed, we decided to put the plan document in DC, as I said, as opposed to admin, because you could think about that like today with the regulations. And then from the investment lineup part, certainly open to it, but I think I support Charles's suggestion and recommendation, which is to have the DC side of Tier 5 included and incorporated into the PERS investment policy. Doesn't have to be that way, but I would suggest his recommendation. Because for Tier 5, for those Tier 5 individuals, that's their PERS. Plus, it would eliminate some redundancy as opposed to having, you would incorporate that and have its own section in the PERS funding policy or the PERS previous funding policy. Have its own section there as opposed to a separate policy, so you'd maintain 3 instead of 4, and you could eliminate some redundancy there. But again, like I said in the beginning, boils down to board preference. As I close, I'll share a couple other ideas that came up in our discussion, and we saw a little bit of it yesterday. Is another thing we could think about doing is certainly maintain the DC committee, but the investment portion of that could, for ORP and MDC, could all be included in the investment committee and handle all the market update and investment information in the investment committee. Because, you know, there's a lot of overlap. There's usually questions that overlap in the market part. So that's an idea, just as a brainstorm. And/or we could have the investment committee first, if you prefer. We don't have to do that. You could still maintain the DC committee, but include the investments all in one. But with that said, it really defers to all of you. That's something Dr. McCoy had mentioned for me to comment yesterday, but time was kind of short. So if you can give us some thoughts on that now or in the future, we'll make sure and incorporate it how we do it going forward.
Whenever an organization has an organization structure, there was always a reason why they did it that way. We currently have an investment committee that handles the defined benefit things. We have the defined contribution committee that handles all of the employee-driven investment things. Now, our senior member, who happens to be our chairman, may have been around at the time that that was organized that way. Can you address that? I mean, I don't know.
It was, Terrence may have even been here at that point. I don't remember, but I know when I first got here, we did not have a defined contribution committee, and what brought it up was two things. One, 2008 with the issues, and that we needed to look closer at the 457B, that we needed to be reviewing what's happening in deferred comp, and also the ORP, and which were the two things that were assigned to that. But 2008, if I'm not mistaken, is which is when I got here, is kind of is what drove that. Is at that time we were pretty much hands off on those two items, and then we're fiduciaries for both, and so we need to look at those. And the defined contribution committee was created as a result. If I'm not mistaken for any of that. If anybody's here that was there,
in my understanding,
tell me differently. But That's what I remember.
Just like you're saying, my understanding was to put more focus on the DC programs in every way, basically.
And we weren't, when initially when I got here, that was kind of brushed aside and not really talked about any, but then we needed to put more focus on those as a result, particularly as a result of what happened in 2008. We needed to look at the investments in each one of the investment options in each one of those.
And which I certainly think we should continue that focus on the programs and continue the DC committee.
Well, from my perspective, the ORP, that is their retirement plan. I mean, it is.
That's their total
It is
retirement.
single, solitary, that's theirs. The deferred comp is voluntary contributions, and it is the individual's plan. I mean, that's what it is. It seems to me that the defined contribution is my plan if I'm doing it. It is what is driven. So from my perspective, I think we need to consider that we leave all of the employee-driven things together and the defined benefit together, because they both overlap, but and I don't know enough right now to say one way or the other than that driving thing to me is this is employee-driven and this is the defined benefit driven. And you just leave those separate to address, because as yesterday in Charles's pros of why we wanted to have the same lineup, it would be ease in administration, and that we'd be talking to the same people. So if we're doing that, it seems like that ease would be over in the defined comp committee. So I don't know when we have to make a decision on that, but that's just my first blush at it. I don't know.
Well, I think that's the nice thing about it is you flip a coin, do what you want to, then we can change it whenever it's working, if it's not working.
That's right. And on that, well, certainly don't object to that, and however you prefer and y'all prefer. Just a few things to give you some thoughts on it, to consider. I guess you could think about how, let's see, ORP and MDC are plans that PERS administers, and it's not to conflict with what you just said, but ORP and MDC are plans or programs that are administered by PERS as an agency and a board, whereas this Tier 5 DC portion of the hybrid is part of PERS as a retirement plan for those Tier 5 individuals. That doesn't disagree with anything you said. That's one, then the other part is what we would do on the investment policy standpoint, not necessarily where the committees are. But if we go that route, which we'd be happy to do it and no problem with that, we just create a separate investment policy for it as opposed to it being a section. So we'd have 4 instead of 3, but that's perfectly fine.
The money is separate. The money's not part of the defined benefit. It's not, the money is separate. The money doesn't even come here. The money goes to Empower. So if it go, I mean, if it's separate, to me, it would kind of give us another line of saying, well, now that's separate. That's yours, and it's yours driven, and this is what we're. I mean, that's just my thought. I'm like you. I think that if Empower is going to have, do it, we just leave it over there for now, and then when we need to, if we need to for some reason, then move it. So.
Yeah, I think it's more the board and what reporting would be and what's the better way to do it. And I don't know that any of us know
At this
right
point.
now.
Well, and one thing I would say, which I'm getting the feedback now, is if you want to put all the investment stuff in the investment committee, then that would be one thought. But if you want to leave it in DC, then that would be another, which is basically what you're sharing. So we'd be happy to do it. So unless y'all have any more, we'll just keep that in mind, which at this point would be leaning all that stuff toward the DC committee. And you could always change it.
I've
as a
had better
committee.
information for decisions I've made before and been wrong. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's just another one of those.
Well, that sounds good. Well, like I said in the beginning, it really boils down to just board preference. And so I appreciate that. And Mr. Chairman, that's all we have unless any of you have anything else for me or the staff.
All right, any other comments? We stand adjourned. Thank you.
Pretty good time.